From the Great Wall of China to the great weight of domestic expectations. The Prime Minister's back in the country for the resumption of Parliament this week. He's in a commanding political position and we're about to see how he'll use it. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. It's been a long wait since the election, but the 48th Parliament will convene on Tuesday. A huge Labor majority, a record number of women and a coalition reduced to a rump. With its strength of numbers, the government is facing demands for action on a range of fronts. Protecting vulnerable kids in childcare is just one pressing concern. We'll discuss that with our guest this morning. For the Prime Minister, the return to domestic debates will require a gear shift after spending the past week moving Australia's critical relationship with China into a new phase. Big differences and disagreements with Beijing remain, most notably over the status of Taiwan. But this was a visit marked by its warmth, its lengthy duration and its orderly nature.
Ready to go?
Ready to go.
Anthony Albanese has kicked off his visit to China by rolling out a new campaign aimed at winning back our biggest tourism spenders.
Rubbing shoulders with ex-Socceroos making a living in China's boomtown.
We have a parliamentary football team. We're not very good. And this guy here is clearly feeling the friendship between Australia and China as well. It's a great honour to be here at the Great Wall of China, following in the footsteps of the Labor Prime Minister Gough Whitlam.
Frankly, I have to say that some of this is starting to look a little bit indulgent.
Showing a bit of respect to people never cost anything.
Anthony Albanese has set the stage for what he calls constructive talks with the Chinese president.
The China-Australia relationship has rose from the setback and turned around.
We cooperate where we can, we disagree where we must.
So I got an unerring feeling of, seeing the communist crocodile. You can go see them, but the crocodile just stares at you. And
President Xi said that China engaged in exercises just as Australia engages in exercises.
We also note that he hasn't had conversations or been in the room with President Trump.
19 militaries have gathered in Australia for the Talisman Sabre War Games.
It's effectively a deterrent mechanism because our ultimate goal is no war.
Anthony Albanese faced tricky questions about new American AUKUS demands and a potential war over Taiwan.
Elbridge Colby has reportedly been telling Australia and Japan to be clear about how we would respond if fighting broke out.
We support the status quo when it comes to Taiwan. We don't support any unilateral action there.
It's unreasonable for Australia to have to declare a position for a hypothetical.
We should have a joint commitment with them to the security of Taiwan.
Angus Taylor has, in the view of some of these sources that I've been speaking to, certainly pushed the boat out here.
We want peaceful preservation of the status quo across the Taiwan Straits.
That's way above my pay grade to try and define what Angus Taylor means. I'll catch up with you all a little bit later.
My guest this morning is the Shadow Minister for Education and Early Learning, John Odamina. First, let's check what's making news. And Tasmania's early election has produced another hung parliament, not much different to the last. There's been a swing to the Liberals and Jeremy Rockliff is hoping to form government again. Labor's vote has sunk to its lowest level ever in the state. The move to force an early election appears to have backfired, but the Labor leader didn't concede defeat. Here were the two leaders last night.
The people of Tasmania, in return, have said that they have no confidence in the Labor Party to form government.
Tasmanians have voted for a parliament that represents a diverse range of views, one that appears highly likely to be progressive in majority.
Well, let's bring in the ABC's chief election analyst, Casey Briggs, joining us from what looks like a chilly but beautiful Hobart this morning. Casey, tell us what happened last night.
Yeah, David, I can't feel my face, but it is a beautiful sight down here in Hobart in the middle of winter. There's a reason they don't normally have winter elections in Tasmania. Look, Labor brought on this early election through its no confidence motion in Parliament, the events leading us to where we are today. And look, the problem for Labor is that they haven't gained any seats. Take a look at the state of the chamber as we stand on Sunday morning. We've got Labor with a definite 9 seats. We think they're well placed to pick up a 10th seat, but the Liberals are on 14. They could grow even further from there. 5 Greens and at the moment 3 other independents. So in broad terms, the party breakdown, the 3 major parties have roughly the same number of seats in the next parliament as they did in the last one. The news gets worse for Labor, though, when you look at their vote share. They've gone backwards. Have a look at the change in vote in this election. The Liberal Party is up about 3 points. Labor is down about 3 points. So just on a political level, it seems like Labor has, lost the battle of who is to blame for bringing on this early election, and there are people that have moved away from Labor in this election. Having said that, we have another hung parliament where the numbers are broadly similar. Now, we know Jeremy Rockliff, with more seats, intends to go back to the governor and seek to be recommissioned as Premier. He wants to try his luck with the next parliament and remain in the top job. Problem is for him, there are some challenges. It's not quite clear, despite the fact that the Liberals have the most seats of any party, it's not quite clear that this parliament's any easier for Jeremy Rockliff than the last one. For one, while the party totals are similar, there's been a fair bit of change on the crossbench. The 3 former Jackie Lambie network members that supported and gave confidence and supply to the Liberal government last year, they've all been defeated. They're wiped out, and in their place we've seen new, potentially new members of the crossbench. Definitely Peter George, who ran in Franklin in the federal election. He'll now enter state parliament. Christy Johnston's been re-elected, a progressive independent with an increased vote in Clark, and Craig Garland's doing all right in Braddon as well with an increased vote. David O'Byrne, very well placed, and he had supported the Liberal government as well. But overall, we're looking at a more progressive crossbench than the last parliament. So can Jeremy Rockliff manage to, negotiate the support of enough people to get to that magic number of 18? That's the big question. The other thing to remember about the government state is, well, the next parliament has at least 17 votes sitting with parties or groups that just voted no confidence in the government and its budget. So that's 17 votes that, they're going to need to shift some of those most likely, or they need everyone else in parliament. So it's a challenge. It's maybe a more difficult parliament despite all that's happened and the increase in vote for the Liberal Party. So that's why we're seeing now Labor doing what they declined to do last year, from about 10 seats, try to form a government. I imagine Dean Winters hitting the phones this morning. There are 5 Greens he could potentially work with, despite the fact that he ruled out doing any deals with them emphatically before the election. If they can get the Greens on board, if they can get the Greens support, they'd get them to 15, but they'd still need 3 more votes. So, it could be a long, protracted conversation here. You wouldn't rule Labor out at this point, despite the fact that they start so far behind because of the more progressive nature of the crossbench. So a bit more counting to be done. Final seats still to be determined. Another parliament, David, that looks much like the last one. There might be some people this morning asking what exactly was the point.
And still some wrangling to see who will form government. Casey, thank you. Stay warm. Also this morning, the Sun Herald reports more than 400 childcare centres in New South Wales did not meet national quality standards, according to an independent review, and a further 550 haven't been assessed for the past 6 years. Meanwhile, News Corp papers across the country are going hard on the childcare stories, you can see, with reports child predators are routinely escaping detection and falling through the cracks, allowing them to sneak access to vulnerable children. We're going to start this morning with the Prime Minister's overwhelmingly friendly visit to China. Xi Jinping laid out quite the welcome mat, but the banquets in Beijing also coincided with the largest war games Australia has ever hosted. 19 countries took part, all of them anxious about China's threatening military behaviour. As Anthony Albanese pursues a more stable relationship and new trade opportunities, the realities of strategic competition with China remains. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined this week by Peter Hartcher, Katina Curtis, Gary Adshead all the way from Perth. Thanks for joining us. Peter, to you first. Look, you've described the Australian foreign policy approach as maturing. What did we learn from this China trip about this maturing?
Well, the setting is important, and Australia's under siege, under pressure from Donald Trump. And there was a clamour we heard from the Liberal Party that Albanese shouldn't go to Beijing unless he'd been to see Trump first. Well, that would have given the Americans veto power over Australian relations with other countries.
Well, we're meant to put everything on hold until Trump agrees to the meeting.
Exactly. So what does Albanese do? He accepts the Chinese invitation. He accepts the friendliness, and of course the Chinese were keen to make this a showcase to the world of how China can be friendly and offer benefits to other countries, even US allies, in sharp contrast to Donald Trump. So Albanese makes the trip, starts some trade negotiations, and at the same time, as you've just pointed out, Australia hosts the largest warfighting exercises in its northern reaches that it's ever held, 19 countries. Now, Kevin Rudd has described China's way of managing Australia as one of pressure and release, sometimes at the same time. In one area, you'll apply pressure, in another, release. Well, what Australia's now trying to do, I think, is play the same game. You can have pressure through hosting these large military exercises. Penny Wong last week giving a pretty harsh speech about Chinese disruption and tactics, and at the same time gush over the pandas and offer more trade prospects to Xi Jinping. So I think it is a maturing where Australia is able to deal with both great powers, and when other countries do it, you see this with a South Pacific country. You'll see them playing the two great powers off against each other, and we can recognise that, and we say, oh, that's smart, and maybe we should do more to keep them on our side. But when we're doing it, which is what our government has just been doing, we seem incapable of seeing that. We hear all sorts of hysteria about how we should be doing more or less or whatever. But as you say, I think this is a more mature position of dealing with both the great powers.
Yeah, and Katina, the Prime Minister seems pretty untroubled, it must be said, by the criticism from the opposition here at home and some of the China security hawks as well about the length of his trip and the warmth of the trip.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, he really saw it as an opportunity, particularly on the trade front. Was reports this week from Reuters that we're actually on the verge of striking a deal to send some ships full of canola to China soon, which haven't been in 5 years. So, maybe there actually will be some more tangible outcomes from this than what was actually done at the trip. I guess one of the things that's really struck me this time is, 2 years ago in 2023, when the PM went to the White House, that trip to the White House, there was plenty written. I remember writing some stories to this effect myself, saying, oh, why is he at the White House? He should be going to China. And then obviously he made that first trip to China shortly afterwards. Because we were still coming out of the deep freeze, but we were all friendly with the Biden White House. This past week's been almost exactly the opposite. All these stories written saying, oh, this trip to China's being overshadowed by questions about our relationship with America. So it really shows, as Peter was saying, like those kind of swings and roundabouts, and the way that, when there's these two big powers and we're kind of in the middle and got important relationships with them in different aspects, that balancing act that we need to play. And sometimes we're going to focus more on one, and sometimes we're going to focus on more on the other. It's
a very interesting contrast, Gary. A lot of the criticism from the opposition, and it remains today, is that what did he achieve? He didn't achieve anything for the 6 days that he spent there. The PM his retort has been, well, jobs. What do you think? Is it a tangible achievement that he can point to?
Well, I think from a West Australian point of view, if you don't mind me sort of throwing that in there.
That's what we want.
You talk about $162 billion worth of export trade with China from Western Australia alone in, say, 2023, to give you a figure.
Yeah.
Okay. You saw Andrew Forrest up there. You saw other iron ore mining company bosses up there. There was a reason for that, and I think we'll talk a bit about green steel going forward. Andrew Forrest has some genuine concerns about where China will be looking for its iron ore in relation to green steel into the future. I think from the economic powerhouse side of things in terms of Western Australia, it's very important that the Prime Minister goes up there, and if he walks the Great Wall of China, who cares? If he holds a panda or looks at a panda, great. But in terms of the need for him to have that relationship with Xi and China, it's imperative from an economic point of view.
Let's talk about the green steel, because this was a significant part of it. They had this round table, all the mining bosses were there with him. Ross Garnaut's been working on this idea for some years. The idea is that instead of just digging and sending iron ore to China, we can do the processing into iron using renewable energy to decarbonise the process. Now, it's going to require a fair bit of investment. China's obviously keen to decarbonise their steel making.
And Forrest has been pushing it hard.
Yeah, how realistic is it?
Well, I mean, anything when you talk about green anything at the moment, when you look at green hydrogen, which is being pushed at the back, and you know, lots of money's been invested and lost in that. But certainly, if the Andrew Forrest mantra is correct, then the other iron ore companies have to get on board with this, because otherwise you'll see China turning to Brazil and Africa, and you know, that unbelievable resource that we've had that's made the country so wealthy in terms of royalties for so long, it could be in jeopardy. And he's saying that it's a wake-up call for the Pilbara to come on board with the ideas that China have in terms of green steel.
What's it going to take, Peter, because there's enormous potential for Australia here to have this ongoing green steel industry.
Yes.
Government does have a green metals fund. It's going to take more than that, though, isn't it?
It will take more than that. Looking at it from the Chinese end, they've committed to decarbonising their industry, the steel industry, that the world's biggest producer. They make 60% of all steel worldwide. And to feed into that, Australia or any supplier is going to have to be able to supply green iron because the Chinese don't have the resources themselves to decarbonise everything they need to decarbonise. So what Ross Garnaut has said is that, and remember, he was Bob Hawke's economic advisor and advised Australia on how to exploit the Chinese economic rise from the 1980s onwards. He has said this moment in setting up the green iron trade to China now, this trip that Albanese did, is as big as Bob Hawke's trip to China in 1984 to set up what has now become our biggest export, the iron ore trade. So he sees this as a critical moment. And the telling moment on that Albanese trip was that he had all the Australian iron ore bosses with him, of course, but on the other side of the table were the presidents and chief executives and chairmen of the biggest Chinese steel companies. And that represents a decision from their leadership to go ahead with Australia and try to enact this. Now, it will take a lot, as you say, but if you've got commitment from the Chinese side to help with the investment, Garnaut is saying that Australia is going to need federal government production credits and other assistance to get it started. But if it can, Garnaut says, and you know, let's give him credit, he's the authority, that the trade could be worth 2 to 3 times more than the existing entire iron ore trade.
Wow, it's huge. So look, all of that's great and a huge potential there, and you can see the imperative to do all of that. But we still have these big differences, you know, things that do seem to come up all the time, whether it was the Chinese naval circumnavigation of Australia, the PM raised that, the Port of Darwin, which interestingly the leadership in China didn't raise, but we know they're aggrieved about Australia taking that out of Chinese hands. I think the big one, though, looming over all of this is Taiwan. You know, China, Xi Jinping does want to reunify, in his words, Taiwan, and wants his military ready by 2027 to do that. Australia does not want to see any change to the status quo situation. Now, just before the PM goes there, you get this story that leaks out of the Pentagon, where Elbridge Colby, Donald Trump's man at the Pentagon, is apparently saying that Australia and Japan need to give some sort of pre-commitment to join the US in a conflict with China over Taiwan. Didn't go down well with the Prime Minister. You know, he rightly pointed out that sovereign governments here will make decisions on when we're going to go to war. I think his strongest comments were to the ABC's Global Affairs editor, Laura Tingle, in China.
The United States has had a policy of strategic ambiguity over these issues. It's one that's been shared by Australia. We don't want to see any change to the status quo. Australia is a sovereign nation, and governments of the day make decisions on behalf of the Australian government. And certainly I cannot envisage a circumstance where an Australian government would give up that sovereignty.
Indeed. What does it tell us, though, that Elbridge Colby might be making this request? Does that suggest there's some issue of trust in alliance where we have fought alongside the US over the last 100 years in every conflict?
I mean, I think it seems that Elbridge Colby is maybe freelancing a little bit. perhaps because the actual cabinet level leadership is not as strong. You know, Pete Hegseth, he's not a policy guy, he's a Fox News weekend host. And so it sort of falls down then to the, you know, to the sort of slightly lower level officials like Elbridge Colby, who's, you know, by all accounts a thoughtful guy, thinks about these things a lot. Maybe that's what he wants to see. Maybe in his mind the US is going to go in and back Taiwan in the event of any conflict, and so he says, okay, so we want our allies to do the same. But I think it's a very fair point from the PM to say, well, you're not giving this assurance. Like,
why should we?
Why should we do it?
Exactly.
Like, that's pretty fair.
Speaking of Elbridge Colby, people will be familiar with his name now. He's the guy who's conducting the review of AUKUS as well at the Pentagon. Kevin Rudd, our ambassador now to the United States, is sometimes accused of not having, you know, much contacts with the Trump administration. But take a look at what he said about his mate, Bridge Colby.
Bridge has been round my place a lot of times, and so we have known each other for a long period of time. And that's why I'm confident, quite apart from the mature relationship with our two defence establishments, our DOD and the US DOD, that we'll work our way through this stuff.
Yeah, take that. I do have some contacts.
The thing is, look at the timelines here. So, you know, we're supposed to give a commitment that the submarines that we're not going to get until, what, early 30s, 2030s, will be, you know, made available to the US if they decide to defend Taiwan against China. So early 30s, we've got China supposedly talking about doing this by 2027. I mean, the timelines don't even match up in terms of us even having the submarines. And in the meantime, geographically, we will be involved in anything that should take place between the US and China in relation to Taiwan, because we'll have all their subs here.
Is there some
little old
over in WA?
Off the coast of Rockingham.
I've got a Bridge Colby flex too. Kevin, let me do it. I had lunch with him late last year in Washington, and we had a long discussion. And he is a brilliant analyst. But you know, what is he trying to do here with this review? Is he freelancing? He knows well that Australia is, as you said, David, we are the unique ally that has been in the trenches with the US in every war for a century. He knows we have a treaty, and he knows that Australia is hardwired into the US defence security establishment. So why is he asking these questions? Would you be with us in Taiwan? My working hypothesis is that he is doing this, he's setting up a possible pretext in the event that Trump decides he doesn't want to go ahead with AUKUS, or that he wants to somehow punish Australia. He's coming up with this as an excuse, a pretext to walk away from the AUKUS deal, depending on which way Trump decides to blow. Colby may be brilliant, but he's also seen as a weather vane that will shift with Donald Trump's will.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And the question about where Trump is going to land on AUKUS is one thing. The question about where Trump might land on the big question of going to war over Taiwan is also pretty unclear. This, you know, he has. I spoke on the podcast this week to Richard McGregor from the Lowy Institute, and he puts it this way in relation to Trump's own unique version of strategic ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan.
Trump doesn't care about Taiwan. He's disdainful about it. He's put a very high tariff on Taiwanese goods. Having said that, I think what we would like to be in Xi Jinping's head is the words that Trump used in a pre-election interview with the Wall Street Journal, where he was asked about whether China would invade Taiwan, and he said, "There's no way Xi would do that because he knows I'm effing crazy."
Donald Trump's own words. All right. Well, time to talk to the Shadow Education Minister, John Odamina, and to take us there, here was the Shadow Defence Minister suggesting Australia and the US should make a joint commitment to the security of Taiwan.
We should have a joint commitment with them to the security of Taiwan and peace in the Taiwan Strait. We need to have a joint commitment with the United States, regardless of who the president is, about peace in our region, and that means the security of Taiwan. That commitment should underpin what we are doing in AUKUS. It should underpin our purchase of the Virginia-class submarines.
John Odamina, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, David.
We'll get to your portfolio in a moment. First, do you think Australia should make a commitment to the security of Taiwan?
Well, the position of the coalition's been made pretty clear by Susan, James Patterson, Andrew Hastie, and of course more latterly Angus Taylor, and that is we do want to support the preservation of the status quo, committing to a conflict that isn't on foot, pre-committing to a hypothetical conflict is not something we're going to enter into. So it is all about that preservation of the status quo. That's our policy. It has been and remains.
So what's Angus Taylor talking about when he says there should be a commitment to the security of Taiwan?
Well, obviously the status quo, of course, means Taiwan remains its own entity, its own arrangement in the current context. So
should we commit to its security?
Well, I think we need to continue to observe what is occurring in that region, continue to understand what China is doing.
Observing is different to committing to the security of Taiwan.
Well, look, I think what we want to do as a neighbour, as someone in the region, is just understand exactly what the arrangements will be. If there are moves, if there are changes, you consider them at that time. Pre-commitment is not something we're going to enter into.
So what's Angus Taylor talking about?
Well, indeed, I've heard subsequent interviews where he's talked about not needing to enter into these hypothetical debates. And
so he's dropped that idea?
Well, the Coalition's position remains that we would preserve the status quo.
I think we get the picture. Okay.
You do.
All right. Look, let me get your thoughts on the Tasmanian election. As a Tasmanian senator, your home state, the results, just to remind people, the Liberals sitting on 14 seats at the close of counting last night. That may go up a little. Labor 9, the Greens 5. What do you think? Who's going to form government?
Well, the Premier's already said he's going to seek the support of the Governor to commission another Liberal government, and unless Labor can, from their 9, perhaps 10 seats, work to arrange an 18-seat majority, a locked-in majority, I suspect that's what will happen. Dean Winter, who rolled the dice on this, and you would think if you're going to call for an election, as he did, then you're going to come out with something more than a 3% hit to your first primary, your first preference votes, and the lowest result on record for the Labor Party. So I can't see how he conceivably can govern.
You can't see, you don't think it's possible that Labor can form government?
Well, look, it is possible, but it would be an unimaginable disaster for there to be a Labor Party that's gone backward in the polls to join up with the Greens and a range of crossbenchers who have all very disparate views about the future of our state. It would send us backward and we'd be back at the polls in no time.
What's interesting, one thing that's interesting, the Liberals recorded a statewide vote last night of nearly 40%. In the May federal election, the Liberal vote in Tasmania sat just below 25%. It's a huge difference. What do you put that down to?
Well, frankly, we ran a bad campaign. We didn't run a campaign relevant to Tasmania. We weren't speaking to their issues. Politics is local, and never has that been more true than in a place like Tasmania. They own their politicians, they own their issues, they want Tasmanian solutions. Federally, we didn't provide that.
Was nuclear power part of that?
It certainly was, because Tasmanians saw nuclear, and I'm a supporter of the policy, but our advocacy for it was seen as anti-Tasmanian. We've got a great renewable scheme down there, the hydro scheme, backed in by wind. They saw our talk of nuclear as undercutting what we had in Tasmania. So that did contribute to our demise there in Tasmania, a significant hit, and there's a lot to learn from that.
All right, let's move to your portfolio. One of the first pieces of legislation the government will introduce when Parliament resumes this week will be to cut funding for childcare operators that are failing to meet national standards. And this follows, of course, the shocking allegations that we've seen in Victoria. Will the Coalition support this bill?
We've had a briefing from the government. We're catching up with them again on Wednesday to go through the detail of the bill, and it is something we do support. Of course, we'll examine the detail. We've got to do everything we possibly can to deal with what is a problem in our childcare sector. Though this legislation only goes so far. Dealing with the payment mechanism and the payment of rebates to childcare providers in response to this is a small part of what needs to be done. The balance of the work needs to be undertaken by state and territory governments, and so we again extend our support to the government to urge state and territory governments to come together and act with urgency to resolve all of the problems we have across the sector.
And I'll come to some of those things that perhaps need to happen at the state and territory level, but on the bill that's coming this week, would you support some sort of public disclosure? So parents, the public, even the stock exchange can see when a centre has been issued with a breach notice?
Yes, I think we do need transparency around this. As a parent, and I'm sure I speak for all parents, when you're putting your child into the care and trust of people you generally don't know and you're away for the day, you want to know if there are issues with the centre you're putting your kid into. So transparency around conditions, any breaches, any problems, I think is important.
Should there be mandatory CCTV cameras in childcare?
I think we do need to. In fact, I'm baffled that it isn't the case that we don't have CCTV. I mean, obviously we need to protect privacy of children. We need to manage those systems. We know that in Victoria there were some issues around the management of CCTV, but with the right safeguards and right management, I think it is essential as part of the protection against kids in this most vulnerable of settings.
I mean, the details can be more difficult there. You know, do you have the cameras in nappy change rooms and toilets, and then who holds that footage? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it would be very unwise for me to start dictating detail around that kind of thing. I think there are tech experts, experts from the childcare field who will know a lot more about that. But there is no reason why we shouldn't be working with them to get the best arrangement possible to prevent this from happening ever again.
What about this debate around whether men should be working in childcare at all? The government's dismissed the idea that you'd ban men working in childcare. What do you think?
Well, while obviously, sadly, the predominant perpetrators here happen to be male, I don't think banning a particular class of worker because of their gender is going to solve the problem. We know that more recently in South Australia, for example, there were cases of female childcare workers perpetrating harm unto children. What we need is a system that catches anyone who is going to treat children badly in these settings, weed them out and prevent them from working in there. We've got to protect kids from anyone who will do harm regardless of gender.
One of the pressing issues is for a national register to be set up that everyone can see, or certainly employers can see the history of a childcare worker. How much detail do you think that needs to include about work history and why someone's been moved on from a centre?
Well, I think it is important for an employer to know who they're getting into their centre. Again, this is a highly regulated system and set of services for good reason, just like aged care is. If an employee has had substantiated complaints from a previous place of employment in another jurisdiction, I think if I were an employer, I'd want to know. And I think that is essential as part of this registration system and it being national as well.
I guess a big picture question about childcare, one of the problems is just how complicated it is. You know, you've got states and territories doing the regulation, you've got the federal government through the childcare subsidy doing the bulk of the funding, you've got non-profit operators, you've got for-profit listed on the stock exchange operators. It is a bit of a mess. Do you think there's a need to change the structure of the childcare sector, and is there a place still for profit-making operators in childcare?
Yeah, well, the great majority of childcare services provided in this country are for profit. I don't think
two-thirds or something, isn't it? Yeah.
Correct, that's right, just shy of 70%, I think. But I don't think being for profit necessarily is a bad thing. Yes, sure, they want to return investment money to their investors. But at the end of the day, child safety is something that we should be able to ensure is provided for no matter the setting. I think we should have an open conversation about the structure of childcare, but right now, urgent action across all layers of government needs to be undertaken, and we support whatever measures can be done right now.
All right, let's move on. The government will also introduce legislation this week on its election promise to reduce HECS debts by 20%. It'll help some 3 million Australians. Will you support this debt reduction?
Well, I've got to take to Party Room and Shadow Cabinet, of course, our work on that. The Australian people spoke pretty clearly at the last election around the policies the Labor Party took, this being a key one of them. And we're not really in the business of standing in the way of cost of living relief. But I think it is one of those things that Australians wanted, they voted for. We'll go through our process, but I expect this will pass the Parliament.
Well, that's interesting because before the election, the Coalition called this profoundly unfair policy. And there is criticism that it benefits, you know, graduates in medicine and law and high income earning fields more than others. But this sounds very much like you're now going to pass this.
Well, there are criticisms we have, and we continue to hold them, of course. I mean, this is a one-off hit to a cohort of the community funded by everyone in the community. And once it's passed, it isn't in place for future graduates down the track. They'll have their 100% of the bill to pay off. So those concerns remain. At the end of the day, though, the government want to pass this legislation urgently to pass on this relief from HECS debts. That is not going to be something that will be live at the next election unless they want to reintroduce a second round of this. But let's deal with the legislation. We've expressed our concerns. Australians have had their say. We've got to move on.
The government's anti-Semitism envoy has recommended cutting funding to universities who aren't doing enough to stamp out anti-Semitism. Would you support that?
I think it is something that is worthy of consideration. We don't understand how in 2025, in a tolerant, pluralistic society, you can have institutions that might turn a blind eye or allow these sorts of behaviours to occur on campus.
Who should decide that?
Well, I'll allow experts around how managing academic institutions to have that conversation, but as a policymaker, as a lawmaker, I do think that given this issue of anti-Semitism in our country has gone to the levels it has and has dragged on for as long as it has, we have a report that's been provided to government. You had the 15-point plan from the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. We should act on these things. They are formed off the back of evidence and lived experience and responses that need to be put in place. So let's actually do something with it.
The Coalition promised at the election to slash foreign student numbers by 80,000. What's your view now?
Well, obviously, those numbers were part of a discussion that occurred before an election we lost. I think that a lot of the discussion in the lead up to the election, perhaps in that climate, wasn't as constructive as it could have otherwise been. We're looking at all of our policies, and
you're more relaxed about foreign student numbers now?
I think we need to have a proper and open discussion with both the university sector and the community more broadly about how we can approach this. I don't think that any university should, as some have, use international students as a cash cow. That's not appropriate because it's not a good business model. But we need to recognise that a large part of the funding for especially regional universities comes from international students. So a more sensitive conversation needs to be had, and we'll work with the sector and the government about
more sensitive approach on that. Okay, a couple of other questions about your approach in the education portfolio. Peter Dutton promised before the election to tackle so-called woke elements of the national curriculum. Is that a priority for you as well?
I'll tell you what my priority is. When you look at the PISA scores for Australia over the last 20 years, so this is successive governments of every colour, our scores in all the key metrics, maths, reading, science, are all heading south. Investment in students is heading up. Something is not right there. So I'm not worried about specific elements of the curriculum. I'm worried about the foundations in our schools not being taught properly.
Okay, so you're not worried about so-called wokeism in the curriculum?
Well, if we focus on things like reading, writing, arithmetic and kids being able to get those foundational elements right, I think the rest of it will fall away. If we're focusing on the priorities of getting kids out of schools with the best marks possible so they can go into university or higher education, at the best standard possible and become the best graduates, then that will deal with all of the issues people have complaints around, including the woke issues, as they're called. All
right. Do you have any problem, as some of your colleagues do, with transgender girls participating in female school sport?
Well, of course, we need to have an adult debate about these things. It's not one that's been raised with me since the election.
What's your view?
But in terms of transgender girls, I honestly believe that girls' sports should be for girls, boys' sports for boys, and if you have a mixed grouping, then that's something you can arrange by a competition or in a school arrangement.
What does that mean for transgender kids?
Well then, if transgender kids are part of a school environment where they are offering sports, then that would be up to that individual school. I know that there are certain schools, even in my own home state of Tasmania, that make provision for transgender children, and that's a matter for them.
So each school should be able to discriminate?
Each school should be able to set up arrangements, I think, that suit their school community. They know their parents, they know their students, they know what's right for their schools. I don't think it's for me to set down who should participate in what sport and what characteristics they have beyond what I've said here today.
John Odamina, thanks so much for joining us.
David, thanks for having me.
All right, well, coming up, we will look at what is in store for the resumption of Parliament this week. It's not just that Hexted bill, the childcare bill, also a bill to enshrine penalty rates in law. First, let's get back to our panel, and we're joined once more by Peter Hartcher, Katina and Gary Adshead. Peter, just to pick up there on what we heard from John Odamina, just generally on the education portfolio, it does sound like calming down the approach from the coalition on a range of fronts, foreign students, wokeism in the curriculum. Is this a more cooperative approach that we're seeing?
Short answer is yes. Susan Lee has promised to be more constructive, and I think John Odamina has just illustrated how that is being applied in specifics. I thought he did a pretty delicate job of extricating the coalition from some losing positions, including the very foolish and rash comments from Angus Taylor about Australia committing to the defence of Taiwan, when even the US itself won't commit. But yes, I think he's also demonstrated that the coalition recognises young people don't vote for them. So by correcting their position on HEX debt...
I mean, the HEX debt's this is a big financial issue for a lot of younger workers who've got a HEX debt.
Yes.
And the coalition did take this position at the election of, no, this is a bad idea. So that's quite telling.
It is. It's a big marker. Likewise with foreign students. It's a big marker that they recognise that they've blundered. They have, over successive elections, lost young people, and they're now trying to correct. And the HEX debt, by the way, does include debt relief for TAFE debt as well.
Yeah.
So it's a broader thing. It's not some elitist.
On childcare, this has just been a really disturbing issue to watch unfold over recent weeks. And we heard there again a tone of cooperation with the government to get some change in place that's going to fix this, Katina. This bill will go to stripping funding if centres or operators aren't meeting the national quality standards. The Minister, Jason Clare, says this is more about encouraging these operators to improve their standards rather than shutting down centres.
The most powerful weapon the federal government has to wield here is money. Childcare centres don't work, don't operate without the childcare subsidy. It represents about 70% of the funding that runs a childcare centre. The purpose of this legislation isn't to shut childcare centres down, it's to raise standards up.
Yeah, what do you think, Katina? Is this going to make a difference?
I mean, I think so, probably. It depends the actual detail. I haven't been able to get an answer out of the government about, we saw you highlighted the Sun Herald story about the New South Wales centres that are working towards the quality standards. That means they don't meet all of them. I did a similar story looking at the stats for the WA centres the other week. Same kind of thing. Nationally, there's about 10% of centres that haven't been assessed at all, and 10 or 15% that are, quote, working towards the quality standards. And I haven't been able to get an answer from the government whether, are we looking at suspending funding to these centres that are, maybe meet some of the quality standards but not all of them.
Yeah, when do they lose their
haven't
money?
got that threshold kind of sorted yet. It sounds like that might not necessarily even be in the legislation that we'll see on Thursday. So I think that's probably a really key, is at what point is it that you're talking about suspending funding? It was interesting, good question that you asked John O'Ginium about, is there a place for for-profit providers in this sector? It's such a kind of scrambled egg sector at the moment, and a lot of people looking at it saying if you started from scratch you probably wouldn't have for-profit providers at all. Yes, they make up 70% of the sector now, but just 4 years ago they were only 50% of the sector. As the subsidies have increased, all the growth in the sector has been on the for-profit side.
That's really interesting. And of course, childcare is very different today to what it was some decades ago, where the government is moving towards this universal childcare, Gary, the idea being that we want all kids in childcare, and then you've got these for-profit providers. It's not how you would set it up from scratch, is it?
I'll be blunt with you, this conversation is driving me mad. I've never seen such a after the horse has bolted discussion going on in the last couple of weeks. I mean, the allegations are, and we've seen today, that this particular person was sacked from 3 different locations. All the things are in place already for people to report people they're worried about. And that allegedly happened as well. It did go up the chain to a certain degree. All you needed in this instance was people to do their jobs, and they didn't. And now we're having to talk about legislation to try and look at whether you cut funding from childcare, and with what Katina just said, that is a dangerous proposition for the Minister. Because if that's what you do, you start cutting the childcare funding to the subsidies to these places, then you could actually see places being closed down. And we all know what that's going to mean for parents. But I've just never seen such a terrible discussion about something that really could have been acted upon a lot earlier. And I think as the evidence comes out in relation to these 70 charges, we are going to find out a lot more.
So with the Parliament coming back, there'll be this childcare legislation, the HEX debt one we mentioned. There'll also be a move to enshrine penalty rates in law. It's also going to be arguably an even bigger moment for Susan Lee. Peter. The opposition, I mean, terrible election result. We'll see that visually displayed when they all sit down in the chamber, just how few their numbers are. But the first female opposition leader, the first female to lead the Liberal Party, this will be a big moment for Susan Lee. What do you expect to see, given her talk since she got the job about modernising the party, taking a different approach to Peter Dutton?
Well, on the question of the sheer fact that she's a female leader should send a new signal about the party, its nature and its relevance to women in modern Australia. But she's been very ginger about what her actual position is and how you improve the representation of women in Parliament. And she's allowing the 2 reviews that the party's got underway to sift through that for her rather than asserting a position. So that remains a symbolic achievement rather than an actual one so far in terms of improving representation of women. She said no more culture wars. Well, we just heard John O'Duniam walking away from the culture wars when you asked him about wokeism and all of that stuff. So that appears to be
a shift.
That appears to be underway as well. And as we said, she said she'll be more constructive. So other issues as well. So HECS debt, but also working with the government to try and reform the NDIS.
One of the big tests will be when this economic reform summit is held next month. Now, we don't know exactly where the government will land on tax reform and other reforms to make the economy more productive and how cooperative the coalition will be. I thought an interesting issue was raised by Ken Henry, the former Treasury Secretary, this week. He spoke at the Press Club. Of course, he's got plenty of cred when it comes to tax reform and economic reform, but he was saying fixing the environment laws really is one of the best things you could do to improve productivity.
To put it bluntly, there is no chance of Australia meeting stated targets for net zero, for renewable energy, for critical minerals development, for housing and transport infrastructure, without very high quality national laws that set clear environmental standards for major projects.
Gary's probably right that, when you talk about housing, getting critical minerals off the ground, so many things, it's our environmental laws that slow things down. They tried in the first term, but a lot of the pushback came from WA. Has the sentiment changed at all on environmental law? It hasn't.
No, I mean, the idea that you'd talk about nature positive just freaked people out over there because of this notion that you would have an overriding federal authority that could change things that the state
Environment Protection Agency. So there'll still be pushback from WA?
Absolutely, there would be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way it works.
I think the state government has less of a reason to pick a fight with the feds now, so that will be helpful.
Because they're both on the other side of elections?
But the resources sector it is a red line for the resources sector that the minister needs to retain the decision-making powers. But the resources sector, as much as the housing sector, everyone in the environmental groups approvals, like the fact that it takes so long to get approvals, takes too long to get, it takes almost 3 years to get approvals for a renewables project at the moment. I'm told that in the conversations that Murray Watt is having, every single stakeholder is saying the approvals process is broken, it takes too long, you got to fix it.
There's some irony, isn't there, in the fact that our environment laws are going to slow down the transition to net zero?
Yeah. Yep. And it's a problem.
All right. Well, look, we'll see how much progress there is there. What sense do you get, Peter, in terms of the Treasurer's and the Prime Minister's appetite for ambitious reform at the moment?
Well, the Prime Minister doesn't have a huge attachment to the concept of radical, sudden moves or major digressions from his agenda, does he? So,
what about Jim Chalmers?
Jim Chalmers takes a different view. He's more ambitious for change, and he's a young man. He's 47, so he's thinking, I think, longer term than Albanese, who's 62. He's thinking about the future of the economy, but of course his own career, and he needs, if he wants to be, as he does, a future Prime Minister, he's got to get some economic achievements on the board. And mere housekeeping is not enough. This superannuation bill, for example, the $3 million threshold, that's housekeeping. This is not a major reform. This is tinkering to try and get a little bit of extra revenue. So if Chalmers wants a record of achievement, he has to start now. He'll be he will be cautioned by the Prime Minister's natural timidity on this subject. So it'll be a very interesting test. And as you said, we'll see what the coalition, whether they can be constructive. More likely, they will be obstructive, but we'll see.
We will see. Look, before we move on, I want to deal with a piping hot conspiracy that's been brewing for some time about this program. And Gary, in fact, it came up on your program during the week when you were talking about your appearance here on Insiders.
You'll have to tell us what the coffee's like.
Really? Why?
Well, isn't that the joke? Like there's always a bodum full of coffee and no one ever drinks it.
Everyone puts a... I see on the table. Is it a prop?
Yeah.
Oh, I will. That's the sort of thing I'll find out and they'll hate me for.
Send us a sign, lift the coffee up, bring it to your lips.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's hot.
Oh,
and you guys can laugh. You'll be in your onesies on the couch at home on Sunday morning.
All right. Well, for those two, Madeleine King, of course, and Dean Smith.
To Madeleine King and Dean Smith. It does get a little cold by this time in the program, but it's very...
It's real and necessary early on a Sunday morning where it's -3 degrees in Canberra.
Are we drinking to conspiracy or to insiders?
Exactly, both. All right, good to clear that up. Thank you. All right, our panel, Gary, Adshead, Katina, Curtis and Peter Hartcher will be back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with writer and presenter for Planet America, Melina Wicks, and a very warm welcome.
Thank you.
The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was doing a complicated interpretive dance this week, the China-US two-step. Here's Donald Trump with this Mark Knight cartoon on the good ship aluminum tariff.
Yes, I feel like here he needs a submarine to come through the middle and rescue him, but we're not getting the subs anytime soon, so...
he might be holding this position for a while. I did love this Glenn Leliva cartoon, Melina. It's Anthony Albanese tied up in the Stars and Gripes as he's trying to negotiate things with China.
Yeah, he's just trying to say a friendly hello, but he's caught in literal red tape.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Dean Alston here from the West Australian has summed it up pretty much with a very wordy cartoon here. So, what do you think about Taiwan?
I'd like to visit very soon.
And what about your ship circling Australia?
Sightseeing. What is your position on Taiwan?
We're a long way south.
Nailed it, handsome boy. I think the rule of the trip is don't mention the war that we're probably going to fight soon.
Yeah. They literally did, however, roll out the red carpet, the very red carpet for his arrival.
How long do you think she has to hang on to that bouquet of flowers before it's polite to put it down?
There'd be a chap there or a chapess somewhere that you hand that off to. So, lovely Brett Lethbridge, who's picked up on the positive headline.
We've got handsome boy again.
You shouldn't believe everything you read in the papers, but I'm willing to make an exception. Hope he doesn't get any ideas, Melina. Badu Chow, who's a Chinese dissident, has got the warm welcome of China, and he's got Albo in the steamboat.
Yeah, I'd have to drink a lot of Albo beer before I could face an Albo dumpling, I think. I'd say he's a little bit like a boiling frog here, but that's probably more of a France thing.
Yeah, that's right. The Chinese seem to be pandering to all of his needs as he went to visit Fu Ni, who used to be in Adelaide for about 10 years.
I'd prefer the kind of panda diplomacy where we get to keep a panda at the end of it.
Lovely Johannes Leek cartoon who's drawn some comparisons between our opposition and the ones in China, which is non-existent. Pretty sweet not having an opposition.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, libs bicker over quotas, the one-party system. The Prime Minister, Melina, he visited the Great Wall, and of course there were comparisons between when Gough went there in the 70s.
Poor Albo, Gough's already gone there and done all the diplomacy before him, so there's nothing left to do.
That's right. Just follow along in his rather large footsteps. Lovely Harry Bruce cartoon.
Maybe he'll get inspired and build a Great Wall of Marrickville when he gets home.
I love this Glenn Leliva cartoon. You must be this much Whitlam to enter, and poor Albo here.
Yeah, the ghost of Gough is saying, been there, done that.
And of course the requisite pictures of him on the Great Wall.
Yeah, he's on the Great Wall in a very average outfit. It's less business casual and more just casual, I'd say.
Yeah, that's Marrickville casual. Peter Brollman has picked up on the wall with Mexico with humour him. He thinks Mexico paid for it with Trump on the top there.
Yeah, Albo wishes he could get this close to Trump.
That's right. Melina, the federal court's decision that we do not owe a duty of care to Torres Strait Islanders, gave everyone that sinking feeling.
You know you're not in a good place when the judge in a case you won is accusing you of not following science.
Yeah. Lovely Kathy Wilcox cartoon. Think of how much deeper in it you'd be if we'd been even less ambitious in our emission reductions targets. Not much compromise for people who have water literally lapping at their door.
No, and they don't look very reassured.
No, not at all. Jess Harwood has sort of summed it up beautifully here. On the one hand, we've got the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, vote for the voice to Parliament. We must listen to Indigenous Australians. And the very next frame, also Albanese.
Please act on climate change. You have a duty of care to protect the Torres Strait from climate change.
Nah.
Yeah, he was all for it until it got a little bit hard.
Yeah. Fiona Katauskas, we won't be held responsible for your home going underwater, but we can leave you high and dry.
It is very disappointing, and I notice here this boat is definitely not big enough for everyone. So.
No. Melina, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week, and I'll let you do the honours.
Thanks. Back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Melina. Thank you, Mike. Time for some final observations. Quick one from me. Mark Latham's portrait still hangs in the Federal Labor caucus room in Parliament House, the wall of former leaders. There is a debate right now as to whether they remove it. I was testing some views amongst Labor MPs. Some say it's got to go. Others, however, there is a view that you can't just erase that history. It should be a reminder of what they did in making him leader rather than hiding the portrait in the cupboard. So we'll see where they land.
Just put some devils sort of...
there you go.
I challenge you all, you and the viewers, to go to the ABS website this morning because they do a survey of income and housing each year. If you go to it, the aims, by the way, of that is to monitor the social and economic well-being of Australians. But if you go to that website now, it says, while we were compiling the statistics for the 23-24, that income and housing survey, we found serious shortcomings in the questionnaire design and data collection processes, so we could not overcome them. And so they're not publishing those details this year. I don't know what that means, but there you go. That's an observation. A colleague picked that up and I thought I'd read it out here in Canberra.
Interesting. Katina?
A lot of chatter from government ranks about not giving in too much to hubris when Parliament comes back, and it really hits home when they're all in the chamber for question time just how big their backbench is. But they're aiming to get through most of the first speeches in this fortnight, and the first two from Labor will be given by Ailey France and Sarah Whitty, the two leader killers. So
subtle.
Not hubristic, not at all.
Just a reminder that we knocked off two leaders in this election. Peter.
The British government has proposed cutting the voting age to 16. This comes up every now and then in the Australian system as well. I think it has the attraction, as our society ages, of rebalancing the electoral incentives for governments and oppositions to take a different set of interests into account. You'd see perhaps more vigorous policies on things like climate change, housing, but it's not going to happen here because the Liberals won't support it because they fear it would send too many voters to Labor and the Greens, and Labor won't do it because they fear it would send too many voters to the Greens.
It's a fair tip. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Finally, in between navigating great power diplomacy and walking in the footsteps of Gough Whitlam on the Great Wall, it was good to see the Prime Minister didn't lose sight of his most important priorities. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm going to need that playlist for my colourful.
I've got to give you my footy tips. I've written them out on a bit of paper because I haven't got any phone numbers or anything.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.